Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Crown Unfiltered, this wonderful, unique, one-of-a-kind podcast about car design. I'm your host, Sam Ofsovitz, and I would like to kick things off today by apologizing for my absence. There were a few things that I had to take care of for this channel, and I had a much-needed rest, and I feel better for it. And I encourage anybody else, for that matter, to do the same. We are back, and we have got a slightly different format. We are reverting back to a single drop, as the cool kids refer to it. So there will be no part 1 and part 2. There will just be entire episodes on a Wednesday, 6 p.m. Berlin time. You don't need to wait till Saturday. It's coming all to you on a Wednesday in its entirety. So you're welcome. We have a monster guest list of super fancy people, soldiers, the people that are the grafters, and designers from other disciplines, sneaker design, product design, and don't worry, there is plenty of legit car designers in this program. Don't you worry. Next level stuff. Which brings me on to today's guest, the mighty Chris Bangle. He is obviously special to a lot of people, but as a young South African BMW fan who didn't know anything about this industry, he was the first famous car designer that I knew knew of. I had to do my own research. I didn't know anything about the fancy Gandinis and Giugiaros or any of the Italian greats. There was just this young American that was tearing up BMW in real time, and all the petitions to get him fired and various death threats and a lot of craziness that I discovered about him. And this just, I just grew infatuated with this figure that was doing all these amazing things. Plus, I was a big fan of what they were doing at the time. You know, the Z4 Coupe, for example. The Roadster to start off with. Shout out to Underswarming. And you know, he was the first car designer that I knew of, the first famous car designer that I knew of. So to be able to speak to him in person is something that I never thought would happen. And if I'm totally honest, I kind of shied away from it for a little bit because meeting your heroes and all that. Needless to say, it was amazing. Chris is unlike anybody I've ever met before. His mind is going off in 100 different directions at 100 miles an hour, and it's almost impossible to keep up, especially for somebody like myself who struggles to concentrate at the best of times, hence my, at times, erratic articulation. So anyway, it was amazing, and Chris is going to share with you now a little video about a project that him and his team have quickly put together, and they've been working frantically to get it live. And it's an NFT project for the people in Ukraine for relief. And I'm gonna shut up now because I'm butchering this. He'll articulate to you, but it's live, and it's there's a link on the website, chrisbangle.com. I'll go. He's got it.
Hi, I'm Chris Bangle, and I want to thank Sam for giving me the opportunity and also inspiring me to make my very first NFT and offer it for you guys for sale. And the reason for this is because the proceeds from this are going to go to a very important humanitarian cause in the Ukraine right now. So I'll tell you about that, tell you a little bit about this sketch too. What I'm NFTifying is a sketch of mine of the Coupe Fiat. And I guess you guys know that this is the last car that I drew every line of, at least on the exterior. And the car is kind of special to me in many ways. it's not so easy to get a drawing into the car. I mean, it certainly didn't happen like that in the 90s. It was a really convoluted process. And I think, you know, they say cars reflect their designers. They look like their designers. This car kind of maybe looks like me a bit because it's a little bit got too much energy, stuff trying to come out, too many ideas trying to get out. And so maybe it looks a little bit of that confusion that makes the design interesting and last over time. But anyway, has a special spot in my heart. The sketch is done in the old school style with paint markers on this really nice rough paper, which is the placemat paper at the cafe down in Carew, little town below us where we go have lunch, which is also a nice thing, you know, to keep the tradition alive of sketching at lunchtime. And this doesn't get any more sketch than this. So the drawing is very important to me, and I hope you like it too. But more important is, you know, where the proceeds of this are going to go to. So I hope you make a bid on it because it's going to be lasting for 72 hours. Just go to chrisbangle.com, and we've set this up just for this one event. So at chrisbangle.com, you can make a bid in crypto on this drawing. And all of the money from the first sale, 72 hours is the length of the first bid, all of the money from that first sale is going to go into the charity, and 30% of every subsequent sale will also go into the charity. And it takes a little while to find the right charity that can take crypto, and it seems everything works out well. But I think this is a really good one for this because it's specified for the Ukrainian crisis. And this is going to the Binance charity, Humanity First Ukraine Emergency Relief Fund. So it's important to me that this isn't going to go into guns or anything like this. It's going to go into help and helping the people who are helping the people who really need it there. It's a very important cause, and I hope you will donate to this. None of the money goes, as I say, to me or anybody working on it, but I do want to thank them for helping me on this. And that's not only my team here at CBA and Matteo and the others who helped me with it, but also our friends in Germany, Xaver, and also our friends in America, especially Corey and Pascal and Ryan, who helped me put this all together. So thank you very much. I hope you can go onto the site, make your bid, see how it goes, and remember, all the money is going to a very good cause. You'll find it there at chrisbangle.com. Now, this is my very first NFT, but I don't think it's going to be my last one, but maybe it's just that much more special because it is the first. So thanks again.
So, Chris, I thank you so much for agreeing to do this, especially at this time of year. I'm sure you guys are crazy.
I'm back in the office, as you can see.
Well, I heard that you guys are crazy busy and that you had a gap over this Christmas period. So I'm really grateful that you chose to spend it with me.
Yeah, we shut down the studio kind of, but like my wife worked this morning. I worked this morning. One of my guys at home is worried. I mean,
does your wife work with you as well in the studio?
Yeah. Sure. She's responsible for the finances.
I have a similar arrangement as well. My wife's an accountant, and she handles all our finances as well.
And guess what comes due the last week of the month?
Taxes. Nice.
Exactly.
Nice. Well, somebody's got to keep the creatives at bay, so it's a nice it's a nice combination. Chris, let's. There's a hell of a lot to get through, so I'm going to start right at the beginning. I've been doing some background research on you, and rightly or wrongly so, I don't know if it's correct, but I understand that you had quite a practical schooling, like woodwork and printing and drafting and that sort of thing. And I wondered, you have allegedly initially enrolled to become a Methodist minister. Can you elaborate on that?
Like, how are those two things linked?
Yes. I mean, first of all, is it true?
And drafting. Yeah, it is true. It is true.
Okay.
Where were you broadcasting from?
Right now I'm in Poland, but we're normally based in Potsdam in Germany.
Really? Oh, cool.
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So
that's okay. I was just wondering because when you refer to school systems and things like that, Europeans have different, school breakups and stuff than the Americans do. And so you're referring initially to my high school years, which was in Warsaw. a school called Wausau West, which was very progressive. They still are, I think. They modeled their school after the German schools. They sent teachers over. This is back in the 70s, right? Or the late 60s, early 70s. They sent teachers over to Germany to learn how the apprentice systems worked there, in hopes that they could develop a similar type of thing in that area, send kids not to college, but rather more into vocational work. Because Wisconsin is an area of paper, they make a lot of trees, they have paper mills there. Paper is also part and parcel with the printing industry. So that our school would have printing presses and stuff like that now seems really radical. Probably in that area at the time, it seemed very logical. But they're huge, like Heidelberg presses you can print a newspaper on. So when you're like 16 years old and you're being taught how to do that, that's like really cool. And at the same time, they encourage things like technical drafting. Design kind of didn't exist, which was also very useful. Of course, there were no computers or anything back then. However, the same school, instead of what would be normally, let's say, prioritized in an American high school, a sports thing, like when they built it, that equation, we put in a swimming pool, for a swim team, which is a very good athletic thing. You want to have a swim team. They didn't. Instead, they installed a planetarium. It was very unusual, and also spoke to the more high intellectual side of their teaching. So they offered kind of both to students. So while I was in high school then, we worked with lasers, and we studied wave theory in physics, and at the same time we had printing presses and took apart cars. Very, very unusual. Anyway, so much for Wausau West. And then I went on to a local college, which was an extension of the University of Wisconsin in Wausau, because my sisters went off to college before me and burned up all the money. So my parents said, "You go someplace cheap, right?" Like in town. But I was very excuse me for rambling on here. I was very fortunate that this college, as an extension of the UW system, the UW has its, let's say, central campus in Madison, Wisconsin, the capital of the state, which is like 4-hour drive away. And it's huge, huge, huge camp, thousands and thousands and thousands of students, right? And really good professors, very, very well-known medical college there. But this was right after the 60s, when there were a lot of campus unrest events at Madison. There were bombings and riots every weekend, that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And many of the professors who were looking for a quieter life, they took the option to go out into the extension system throughout the state and settle down and take up their lives in these little small towns. So suddenly this little campus that we had, which was very small, my parents paid like $75 for a year,
wow,
something like this, right? It had these top-notch professors in it because they had, kind of exodus from Madison. So I was really, really fortunate to have absolutely the top best, I think, literature professors and in writing, philosophy, ones you could never have gone to otherwise, that they happened to show up at this campus. I was really lucky. And that was all part of trying to get into this like pre-seminary courses. You get all the liberal arts past you, and then you could go to seminary. Except by the time I got the liberal arts out of the way, I decided there's a cool thing called design, and so I joined the other side,
Okay, because I like going through it. In hindsight, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because there's obviously this academic element and this study of humanities and all that sort of stuff that comes with, I guess, religious studies. I don't know what's exactly involved in the curriculum, but I also read that the whole critical thinking was really instrumental in your development. And it makes sense from a practical standpoint. But I wonder if you were you thinking about it from that point of view, or was it that you were were you actually planning to become a minister?
Well, I thought being a minister was a cool thing. I was very influenced by our own minister, who was a wonderful guy. But I never made it to seminary. So these religious studies I never took. Instead, I kind of got them perpendicularly through the literature studies, because our professor there was, he started with classics, and it was pretty high on, you should understand how these analogies work. And when we're talking about this, you're referring into the Bible of this, and you better look it up for the next session, otherwise you wouldn't know what he's talking about. So I think at the time I was pretty stupid, and went through college just trying to get the credits out of the way and not really thinking about learning, which is one of these weird things. When you're young, you tend to kind of like screw off the best years of your life. And then later you go, God, what they were trying to tell me. And then you go back in and you read all the stuff all over again. You dig out all your notes. I still have some of mine around here. And you go, shit, that's what they were trying to tell me. Okay. So it was important. It was formative, but at the same time, could I have gotten more out of it? Yeah.
But you only did it it was only a short period though, right? It was only was it
2 years?
Okay. All right. And then of course you went off to Art Center and,
sorry about this. I'm destroying your microphone here.
Carry on. You carry on. And then you went out to California to go and study at Art Center, and the idea was then definitely to become a car designer, or were you looking at a more generic approach to design?
No. I was enamored by the idea there was such a thing as car design. I found out about it on a model box that said, this monogram model of the Red Baron or something like the Pie Wagon was designed by a guy named Tom Daniels, and Tom Daniels went to Art Center. I go, what the hell is this, right? I mean, in those days, if you wanted to know about a college, you couldn't Google it. You had to look it up in the books at school. These are the college, that are registered. Art Center, nobody heard of it. All right. So I actually went out and visited it because I had the occasion to see my sister who lived in California. And we visited the campus. It was the old school campus in LA, which had kids doing sewing machines. The idea that someone actually had to model this thing, it's like, wow. And then, of course, car models here. So that started me on this path of putting together a portfolio for that, which I knew nothing about. And I was very fortunate to be accepted. And my parents said, you have enough money for 1 year, which is 2 semesters. It wasn't even 3, just 2. And after that, you're on your own. So I was very, very fortunate to win a scholarship then afterwards from Ford. So, yeah.
Wow. And is it true that you already had a thing for comics at that stage, and that you included?
Yeah.
And where does that come from?
I'm never too far away from some books. Pogo here. See, my father used to read to me Pogo when I was a kid, right? And Pogo is famous for, let me show you a picture, highly, 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 highly intricate drawings. An artistic style which is wonderful. I mean, I don't know if you can see this. This is a page of his about who killed Cock Robin. It's a whole story about that children's poem, kind of put into allegorical terms. And he was a poet and a political critic. Also, he would take great fun with the languages of the time. This is poking fun at the Cold War. And it highly influenced me to try and draw like that. So I tried to draw like Walt Kelly, the artist of Pogo. And I eventually actually won a prize when I was in college at the UW for the Cartoon of the Year. Maybe I was the only one. I don't know. Anyway, won a prize. I actually have a prize for being a cartoonist. And then when I went off to Art Center, I used the cartoons as well in my work there. And when I got hired by GM, I put them in everything. So I would draw little robot people and cartoons of animals and stuff like this in with the drawings. And even a place as strange as GM has this need for a human side. The guys, it's probably something, the more people in a corporation think they have to act corporate, the more this childlike wonder of the world gets pushed down, and it's waiting for a little valve to release it. And if somebody in your studio is just kooky enough to do shit like that, then comes out and big smiles erupt and people feel better. And they may think this or that about your design work, but they feel like it was positive energy that you brought into the studio that day. and they very much appreciated
And
that.
Chris, at that time, do you think that was only kind of forgiven or not forgiven, but I guess maybe it was tolerated in design, or do you think it was like that across the board?
I think probably cartoons everywhere have always had this effect on people that, they're able to say things visually that you can't say otherwise. So, I mean, my whole youth in those days had a little bit of that tinge to it, trying to make some sort of a statement, and not too much, but just enough so that people woke up to the fact that they couldn't quite get away with ignoring everything. You had to put some kind of spin on it. And yeah, cartoons are very helpful. Then it kind of went dormant for many years, because I always drew the cartoons around us until, of course, not too long ago with Archie that started up. But yeah, that was a very important part of my youth.
Incredible.
That and calligraphy. I would say that my work I started when I was very young. A woman in our church had me letter the Bibles that they would give away at communion to the young people, right? And you'd have to put their name in it in this very nice kind of Gothic-looking handwriting. And she taught me how to do that. And that got me interested in these special pens that calligraphy uses. And I had great fun playing with those and making illuminated text-looking types of letters and stuff like that. And that led an interest into graphic design, I think, that mated well with the printing courses, so that later at Art Center, this background of kind of how lettering works, calligraphy works, typography, what it's about, how the printing processes work. Back then it wasn't done in computers. You had to do this stuff with film. And so that means the whole film process is developing your own film, burning plates, setting up a press. I mean, if you've gone through that by the time you're 18 years old, then going into Art Center, you felt much more confident about what they were asking, which was a good thing because I was totally insecure about everything else. So at least I had that going for me.
Chris, did you? I read that you had like a summer job at a local firm doing graphic design, and I wondered did you do any like shitty jobs as a kid, like because that's quite a cool summer job. Like, I mean, did you work, I don't know, shoveling snow or taking out washing cars for people, or did you do any of that sort of stuff at all?
It's interesting that this is interesting to your readers or your listeners. I find that
well, it is, but it is because the thing is, in hindsight, like, I mean, your whole journey is you seemed so well equipped to do all these different things at quite a young age. Like, for example, when you got into BMW, you had all these tools at a pretty young age. To be able to deal with such a complex position like that, and it is interesting. Like, early life and your development is interesting because you pick up all these skills along the way, and it's not always obvious at the time.
That's a good point. Okay. Interesting you see it that way. Okay. Well, our generations were the kind where you had this focus on making money because your parents, even if they had money, they wouldn't give it to you, right? Because they came from the Depression generation, and they were like totally into no money for my kids. They don't need money. What the hell do you need money for? They don't need money. So if you wanted to do anything, you had to somehow get it yourself. So from a little kid on, we did things. My neighborhood friends and I, we would collect pop bottles and take them back and get the bottle return, 3 cents on a bottle or whatever it was, and we would put on magic shows for the neighborhood kids, charge them a dime or something like that, and then do some tricks and stuff that we figured out how to do. I was very proud of that stuff. A lot of fun with that. Always kind of, hoard money, and when you have $2.50, what are you going to do with that? Buy something. And I remember this one time that my friend found all these magazines that were being thrown out. And we said, hey, we can sell these. Well, what we didn't know is that the stores, when they don't sell magazines, they put them on the back for the guy to pick up, and they get returned to the supplier, right? And that's how they balance out how many they actually sold. So we inadvertently we're gleaning from that, so stuff that would make money. I had a paper route when I was a kid, which was the kind that was early in the morning. It was a 5 o'clock route. So the papers got dumped on my desk at our front porch at 4:45, and at 5 o'clock I had to be on the road. And in Wisconsin, 5 o'clock is dark most of the year with my bicycle. And I had the worst route that anybody had like only like 40 papers on it or 35 papers. And they were strung out for miles. So, at the end of the day, you didn't make very much money. There were some kids who had like hundreds of papers, but they were all within a 2-block radius. I had a bicycle for fucking ever. And you made about very little money out of the whole deal. But it was quite enjoyable. I liked that very much. And so, that whole time I was trying to have jobs that would make money. When I finally got the job that you were speaking of, working for Jerry Hartkopf at Hartkopf Associates, I had a summer job working for him for a couple summers. But at the same time, I was working in a discotheque on the weekends at night, and I was spinning records. Can you imagine that? DJ? And yeah, sure. And this is like back when Brick House was brand new. Like YMCA was brand new. Can you imagine that? I can remember that. And I can remember spinning those records thinking, nobody's ever going to listen to this shit. Okay. Anyway, that certainly lasted. And besides that, I had a job pumping gas at the local gas station. So I'd always worked at this gas station, helping them out there, pumping gas or whatever. So I had these 3 jobs during the summer simultaneously to help make money to go to Art Center because it was an expensive school. Anyway, even if you had your tuition covered. Which was kind of cool because Jerry was a super Bible thumper, and if he found out that I was in a den of iniquity of a discotheque on a weekend, he would axe me. So I had to be really careful. Other summers I worked in a factory that was a window making factory, and this was really good. I mean, I'd never had a job where I had to stand on my feet for 8 hours solid and just work robotically, like seriously robotically. And my father said, you take this job, it'll make you want to go to college. He was wrong because I had a lot of fun there. And the guys there were just insanely hilarious. They were really, really fun. The foreman on our shift was a woman. Didn't take shit from anybody. She was a real toughie, but a wonderful woman. I don't know her name, but she was a complete sweetheart, but really tough. And the first year I was there, I was just a monkey for the first guy. And during that summer, he managed to run his hand through the saws that on the machine I was on. Yeah, I mean, there are 14 saws in this machine. There's like no guards whatsoever. And he actually took himself apart on the conveyor belt, not on the saws itself. So the next year, when I went back, I was given command of the machine. And when you're like 19 years old or something like that, I guess I was, to have one of these things that you set up, it has to run to the 1/4 of a millimeter to be precise. You have to run at a pace. You got to fire that stuff through, run a couple thousand pieces through, and they all have to be perfect. And you have to do this again and again and keep resetting it up. It's a job, but at the same time, there's a huge amount of satisfaction in it. And I memorized a lot of poetry at that time because when you're just, doing stuff like this, repetitive jobs like this, your mind goes into other places. I'm pretty lucky I didn't cut my own hand off because those saws at night, I worked a night shift too. And, at like 1 a.m, those saws, they're just doing this and they're just gleaming at you. And they're saying, if I just reached out and just touched that, So I'm happy I didn't do that. I probably would have after a while. Anyway, so I had a lot of jobs like that showed me what it's like to work on a line. I had to make sure my own son worked on the assembly line at BMW when he was that age, which he did for a number of summers. I think things like that are very good experiences to you. Now I'm very interested in how we as designers can provide jobs to people like that. Instead of trying to take those jobs away, I'm trying to find ways we can reconstruct manufacturing so that those jobs can stay. Because, for a lot of people, it's fine. It's okay. I go to work. I'm in a different world for 8 hours. I come home and have a life. That's totally okay. They don't need to have a gig economy and they don't need to, be writing software or running Uber or anything like that. They just like a nice factory job. But, that's another story.
Chris, let's we can get onto the BMW stuff in a minute, but I know that you've been talking quite a lot about all the stuff that you guys are doing at CBA, and I was going to ask you on the subject of getting people into factories, but I think that we need to first
When you want, it's your pitch. You do it your
well.
route.
Let's start off with. I'll start with the question of can you explain Original Sin 2.0?
Wow, that was quite a jump. That's a jump from 50 years ago until like 2 weeks ago.
Well, that's kind of my brain's all over the place, and that's kind of how we operate.
That's okay. Well, okay. Just one piece of backstory on this one is necessary.
Okay.
The only piece of backstory is that this idea of how does design coincide with the future has been on my mind for quite some time. And a couple of years ago, the German government invited me to be a keynote speaker at a symposium they were running called The Future of Man-Machine Coexistence. Like, will we actually be able to survive? Which was quite interesting. And in the ramp up for that, I contacted a friend of mine at BMW, Stefan Barcher, who is, he's a bit uncredited in that speech. I should mention this now, his name. He is running kind of advanced robotics for the manufacturing part of BMW. And he kindly gave me a lot of advice about what robotics can and can't do and where it's going and where the emphasis is. And we sat down one day, we went to the car museum here in Torino for inspiration, came out of it, sat down in the car, and before I left, I turned the car off and I said, hang on a sec. Let's just think this out once. What exactly do we want to have happen here? Anyway, so we put together this concept of what would be a world in which people had a role, which is all about being what people do best, things that are very imprecise and very unpredictable, but in a manufacturing environment. And as we were coming up with this, I started talking with my son, Derek, who is, at the time he was doing his PhD in America on design history, but he's very much a design theorist. And he's had, his undergrad is in urban planning, and after that he got his grad degree in critical writing on design. So he's very much kind of a design theorist. And he said, look, Dad, you cannot imagine the scope of change that is coming at us. And I said, oh, you mean like climate change initiatives and this? And he says, no, you can wrap all that together and you still won't be able to describe what he's calling Original Sin 2.0. And I said, so what is that? So he went back into the concept of original sin, which it's a very Christian idea. Not all sects adhere to this, but I mean, the idea being that Adam and Eve broke the law, acquired knowledge, with the apple and everything like that. And by acquiring knowledge, they not only got chucked out of Eden, but they passed this on to all of us. So all their progeny, all of us are inheritors of this theft, this criminal act. We have all gained knowledge. We have awareness, that is, we are self-determinant, we have our own ideas, we're thinking, we're critical, lots of things which maybe God originally didn't intend, and that's why he put it in this apple and said, don't touch. But instead we have it. And by having that, we have a responsibility, and that's what original sin is about. We have a responsibility to God to show that we're worthy keepers of that knowledge through our faith, through our acts, that we show that we are responsible, and in fact we have redeemed our debt. But that's what original sin is about, okay? A debt that goes back to Adam and Eve. And there's no escape. You're born into it, okay? Sorry, it just is so. And Derek says, the next version of this is going to be us as in debt to the planet, everybody in it. And you know what? It doesn't matter if you think it's your parents' fault or some nation on the other side of the planet's fault. It's everybody's fault. It's everybody's in debt. And we have to prove that we're worthy of redeeming this debt through our acts, which is not about faith as much as it is how we compose ourselves and live our acts. And among those, design has a role to play. So by, let's say, configuring the problem, not as one, how do we make the planet sustainable, but rather by saying, you know what, it will never stop at the planet. It will never stop on human relationships across war barriers. It will never stop across gender equality issues. It will never stop around historical redress issues. It just won't stop. You know why? Because we're born into it, okay? That means our entire lives have to be dedicated to doing the best we can to show that, in fact, we have merited this debt. And that's what Original Sin 2.0 is. So when the question comes, how does design help in all that? Well, then it gets interesting. Does that help?
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
See, it's those preacher days, I could have been there, I could have been a Bible thumper.
Well, you would have been great at it, I think, which is quite evident in your keynotes as well. And I don't know how you are able to retain all this information and all, not just information, but these like critical theories that you're just able to explain in such a simple way and at the drop of a hat.
Oh, I'm glad you say that. Most people say, Chris, you lost me at the bus station. Okay.
Well, I've really paid attention to it. That's probably why. In real time, I'd probably never get it. But I'm quite a big fan, so I've done my homework, Chris. So
you certainly have. I'm impressed.
So if we then move on to objectonomy, can you
objectomy?
Objectomy. Can you unpack that a little bit and how those two things might relate?
I'm so happy you asked. Again, a little bit of backstory. Okay, so the studio got into Archi-Arch and the Inanimati a number of years ago when I came back and made this big statue out here at the studio's insistence. Come on, let's make a really big sculpture. That'd be fucking cool, you know. Wow.
And sorry, can you just explain what Archi-Arch is? Because that's also something that I was unaware of. Yeah.
I also have a book for that here too. This is Archi-Arch. Okay. So here's Archi. He's a triumphal arch. He's a little triumphal arch. And Archi is there because outside our house, you can show your listeners this later, or your viewers. We've got this like 4 meters tall walking arch outside our house, right? It's a huge son of a gun. Okay.
Why not?
Well, wait a minute. Hang on a sec. I have everything here. Okay. So that a picture of it I don't have, but I do have this. Okay. So this drawing I did on a vacation a number of years ago in Croatia, where they have these giant triumphal arches. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if they were like heroes in some adventure story? So this is this giant triumphal arch striding through the jungle, being attacked by these gorilla people. Okay. And I did a whole thing kind of like a cartoon and like a 50s kind of, Tarzan or Prince Valiant cartoon, kind of that kind of stuff. I'm very influenced by artists from those years. I love them all. Right? Frazetta is like one of my big kings, and so I'm always trying to emulate him. As you can tell, there's a lot of Frazetta-isms in this. Anyway, and I came back and showed the pictures to my team, and they said, "Oh, that's cool. Let's make this giant arch," And so we did. We got outside the studio here. It took us 2 years to do it. And while we were doing it, we asked these questions like, what's his name? Where's he going? Why is he walking? Who's his friends? Stuff like that. And we made up this adventure story about Archi-Arch. He is an arch. He's a young arch, and he's, on his adventure to find a triumph, because triumphal arches need a triumph. He has inscribed in the top of him, in this part up here, outside in the cement, it's inscribed in Latin, "Every arch must earn its triumphs." So he's off to earn his triumphs. And in fact, the story of Archi-Arch Adventure is the story of Archi trying to fulfill his purpose. Okay? We did some podcasts with this, and the local kids liked it. We did a lot of cartoons for them. We worked with blind children, which was quite interesting as well, helping them. We made models they could feel of the characters, stuff like that. And then it kind of went dormant for a little while. And then my team said, you should probably do a kind of a rule set, like a backstory rule set, to establish once and for all the game rules in this universe of the inanimati. That means a world where things are alive. We are animati, like animals, animate, and they are inanimati. Inanimate things come alive, right? There are no people in it because there was a split in reality. We're here, they are there. So I took time to write what is called, it's the other side of this book, is called the Fabula Rerum. So in this book, it's about that much.
My God.
If you can see
it.
Okay. And that takes you basically from the origin of the universe until where our story takes place, which is more or less in our time period now, right? Archi's world is happening kind of parallel to ours. And so what that looks like is this. Okay. So here you have the beginning of the universe, and then like that, and then you come down into dimensions. How about that? The idea of dimensions, like different dimensions gets made. And one of the dimensions is called reality, and into reality comes all this stuff, and then at a certain point, it gets split into three. That's down here, 1, 2, 3. And that's why we are here and they are there. So anyway, so in doing all this, it's a cosmology, right? This gets like seriously effing serious. Like you're really into why do we exist and you know, why should we be here and they there, and why are we, you know, what is good, what is bad in a world of things. Okay, little by little, we realized that to understand this correctly, we had to put ourselves literally into the mentality of a thing and begin to see the world from its point of view, which we now call objectomy. That means seeing the world kind of through their point of view. Okay, while this is happening, and we did cartoons and we made animations and had more fun with it, we're also doing design. This is a design studio here, right? And suddenly we realized that, you know, when we have a project with real design work in a real world, these guys are asking us to do stuff that if we took it from the point of view of the object itself, I'll use this pencil sharpener as an example. If we took it from the POV of the pencil sharpener, it'd be completely different. And then the pencil sharpener wants to do things for me that I don't even know it wants to do because I'm not listening to it. And maybe if I did, I would give it that little bit of extra function and it could do that. So by separating the idea of purpose, means why it does something, from its function, which means what and how it does, and objectomy gets into the whys, we are able to, in a real world design project with real customers who pay us real money and sign real contracts, suddenly have a whole new tool set to bring to the table. Okay, so while we were amping this up and getting more and more into this, we realized that if we want to understand like the factory of the future and the product of the future, it's not going to help us to see a product as an isolated instance. It's only going to help us to see the product as a sequence of existences. Instantiations is our favorite word here. You know, that instantiate means to take something non-tangible and make it tangible. So let's take this idea of a pencil sharpener and we're going to instantiate it in a couple of different lifetimes. And therefore, our original manufacturing process is not lost at the end of its first lifetime and it's thrown away or melted down. But instead, the pieces can be reused and used again, et cetera, et cetera. And in doing so, we not only husband our resources on the planet much better, but we give jobs to people because taking stuff apart is what people do really well, right? Okay, if you're going to do this, though, and you see it from the point of view of the object, you realize that this thing has an identity crisis. What am I if suddenly, you know, you're taking me apart, and I won't take it apart, it'll put pencil shavings all over my desk, but you're taking me apart and my constituent parts become part of something else, or I am subsumed into something bigger. So this is also a very interesting subject. As a designer, what is it you're designing? Are you designing a continuum or an isolated instance? And then about this time, we really started getting into blockchain. Like, I don't pretend to understand this really, but what I do understand of it is it gives an amazing ability to have an identity to every single subcomponent in such a manner that even as they become grouped together into larger things, they can retain a sense of identity, because that's basically what blockchain does.
So you can see where every single little component is from and how it was made.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So this little guy here doesn't have any more this crisis that he himself will be lost, because he doesn't understand himself as just a singularity. He understands himself as a team from day one. And this team has other, et cetera, et cetera. So this now comes back into our story. How does this work into a fiction story? And so on and so on. It's really cool. I honestly think objectomy has a lot to teach to designers out there. It's, believe me, it's one thing to say, yeah, I get it. It's another thing to practice it. It's super difficult to practice because many of the things are very counterintuitive to how we see our world.
Chris, I was... I mean, again, it was like in the first instance where you explained it, it kind of went over my head, but I've tried to process it as much as possible. So now when you're talking about it, I actually understand what you're talking about, but I wouldn't have necessarily got it first time. And what I wonder, but I mean, because there's so much to process, you know, and especially like whenever anybody thinks of Chris Bangle, they think of, like this hardcore car guy and car designer, and you think of BMW, you never think of cartoons. You never think of blockchain or any of these things that you're talking about now. And I wonder how you envision us being able to process this when we are designing objects in the future. I mean, is that where machine learning comes in, where they can simulate like multiple life cycles, like product cycles? Because it almost feels like shit. You don't want to touch anything because you can't imagine what the fifth iteration of those set of components would be. Does that make sense? I don't know if.
Yeah, it does. Excuse me. It does. You know, when you wear these masks all day, it makes your nose run.
Tell me about it.
I haven't had even a cold for 2 years, but my nose runs all the time.
And I've just been to South Africa as well, and I dodged that Omicron stuff, so it's a miracle. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good. Okay, I mean, I guess just starting from the beginning point you said there about being a car designer. As I'd like to tell people, you know, car design is to me about putting personality into an object. So the run from that to cartoons is quite close. I mean, this is where we learn from. I took there's a film you can find on YouTube called the 12 Principles of Animation. It was originally whoever did, I can't remember his name, did a super job of showing principles that the original Disney animators had first documented and put down on paper for generations to follow on just what is happening when you're doing an animation. I brought that to a client for a workshop on design, and you should have seen the shock effect on their designers when they saw this is exactly what they're trying to do. And here it is, been going on since the 30s in a medium that we thought we understood, because we all go to the movies and watch it, right? But unless you really see it written down, you do not realize how fundamentally different point of view it is, what these guys have to offer. So this discovery process was for me very much just that, and thankfully one that I have such a cool team around me that is always throwing this stuff at me, including my son, that I have to stay kind of one step ahead of it. So in fact, we just put up the latest unboxing. I'll do a little pitch for that. If you see unboxing 6, it is about what is a rhizome thought model for a design process and how we have a cartoon character that works that way. These are things that maybe 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't myself. I said, why are we talking about this? But now it's like really important. So
I'll link those. Anyway, I'll link those in the videos in the description as well. All of that stuff, because I found it very interesting as well, and I can see all the parallels and everything that you can apply into car design. For example, like when you were talking about the fact that when a Jaguar, for example, has this presence of a feline and these strong like haunches, and you can see the character, you don't necessarily have to put in a fluffy tail and big teeth on the front. Perfect. Right? So I mean the question then is, like, with regard to the series of Inanimati that you're doing and this book and all this stuff, does this, obviously there's these lessons that you pull out of it, but it seems like a really a big effort that you put into getting these lessons out of. So, like, is there a bigger plan for the Inanimati series? Do you plan to create your own IP with this and create physical models and everything?
Oh, yeah. Let me get to that. Okay. Let me respond to your first question. Don't let me forget this one, though. Let me go back to your first question, which was, how should designers think about all this stuff, right? It's a lot to process, okay? As you were asking me this question, I was thinking, if I had one message to give designers today, what would it be? It probably wouldn't be, think about Original Sin 2.0. They'll figure that out on their own. It probably even wouldn't be object to me. They'll figure that on their own, too. Instead, it's a different lesson learned, which actually only consolidated itself in front of me not long ago, just very recently. I was brought up in BMW under a very, we'll just call it the BMW-esque way of seeing things, which is trust is good, control is better. Okay, you know that phrase. Trust is good, control is better. And recently I said to one of my employees, I said, thank you for giving me trust in myself. And the person asked me, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, you know that phrase, trust is good, control is better. Okay? Why do people use that phrase? Because they don't trust themselves as a manager to be able to respond to what you're going to do if it's anywhere outside of the control regime. So that's why everything has to be done twice, once by you and once by me as the manager, to make sure it's the same thing, right? Instead of saying, look, this is the general way we're going to go. You do it your way, and I trust myself to be able, I'm sorry, I'm beating my microphone here. I trust myself to be able to react to it and spin it correctly in my head so that out of it can come the usefulness that we both want in the end anyway. Even though this isn't going at all where I thought it would go, it's probably better, right? So to do that, though, you have to have a number of experiences with people so you understand a bit of the range of their expression. That doesn't make them predictable in any way, shape, or form, but at least you suddenly feel comfortable. And then why do you feel comfortable? Not because you know them, because you know yourself relating to them. And so that's what I was trying to say. I thank you for giving me trust in myself. And that way I don't need to control you because I trust me. And I think if you look at objectomy is trying to split the design process up between who's God in the whole thing. That's you, the designer. I am the creator. I am God. And you, the thing, have no voice in your own creation. Suddenly it's seeing it the other way around. It's saying, no, this has a voice. It has expressions that you may not have expected and may not take you where you originally thought you wanted to go. But if you follow it and you trust yourself to be able to run with it, then a better outcome will come than you could have predicted. And when you talk about, gee, how can I even start designing when this thing has downstream lives and I have to be able to see here and there and everything like that, don't worry about it. Relax. Okay? Just be able to react. And I think this is something that our world, and this is the point I wanted to bring out, our world of hyper-precise and hyper machine-like correctness has no room for the spontaneity and the sense of wonderfulness that the ad hoc response of design can bring if everything has to be controlled from day one. And of course, as I said in that talk, that turned us all into assholes. We're all these like uber control freaks, right? And this is, basically it's just wrong. So if I was going to ask the young people today to take any lessons from that, it's you have to learn to loosen up and control. Okay, like any medium, you can only loosen up when you feel comfortable in it. And you have to do your homework. You got to put in your 10,000 hours. You have to play those etudes on the piano until all 88 keys, exactly where they are in the dark. Of course you have to do that. You can't skip any of those steps. But you don't become some sort of a control freak junkie in the process and think just because this thing is the end result of your mental creative process that you own it. Shit, no way. It has its own life. And the quicker and sooner you begin to listen to it, the better.
Chris, we're gonna jump back to BMW now in a second, and I just wondered, like, how much of this thinking did you have as a young 34-year-old going into such a conservative and controlling environment? I mean, like, I always loved that about your story, but it's only after working with or for a big German OEM that I realized how incredibly difficult that must have been. How much of
it was?
Well, how much of this realization did you have at that young of an age?
Oh, I don't know if I had any realizations. I tried to keep my head intact, and my policy has always been be maybe a little bit overly transparent, a little bit overly honest, a little bit overly forthright, and beg for forgiveness instead of permission. But it's also been my approach to try and see the other side of the story. I read recently a quote where somebody said, there's two sides to every story, but you only understand it when you know what the third side is. And I think it's similar to what my son says. He preaches the concept of Grundlogik, that outside the pyramid of why, how, and what you do, there's an unseen German Grundlogik, ground logic, base logic that nobody talks about. You just assume it, right? But it's only when you get into that and you screw with it and you change it that you can make dramatic things happening. So it could very well be that the background I had in literature and my studies in critical writing that I had at college were the best ones for trying to understand that and realizing, you know what, you can leverage that.
Hence my
when I was 35, I'd have no idea. I was just scared.
Well, Chris, I know I've heard a lot of different things about you, and I most of it's been positive. There's also been some negative stuff, of course, but I think it's, listening to the talk that you gave at the Pratt Institute, you said, like, this is me at my arse-holiest. And I thought that was such a great way of just acknowledging that, like, maybe I wasn't always proud of how I handled certain situations. But I learned from that. And you also said that you could see that if you had stayed in that environment much longer, you would eventually become like a tyrant.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And I think car design management is in particularly destructive in that sense. I haven't worked in any other jobs at that level, so I can't really say, but my general impression of it is that it's far more corrosive than similar management jobs in creative fields, just because of the multiplicity of identities you have to inhabit. Every one of the cars you have to wear like it's your second skin. Every one of the designs, every one of the particularities of the brand, and you become lost totally. There's no more you. And I was pretty well along that way probably by the time I managed to leave.
Wow. It's amazing that you talk about it so honestly, and it's incredible. And I need to say that I had Anders Warming on my podcast about a year ago, and he said such a beautiful thing about you that you had this you said that you're a cannon and you point me in any direction and I'll blow a hole in the wall for you. But you need to be completely honest with me, and you need to tell me everything. You need to be transparent with me so that I know exactly what it is that I'm dealing with. And he also said that you had this great ability to recognize that not everybody was the same, meaning that, like, for example, he said that with him, you knew that he needed pushing, and you would push him to his limit. But then you might notice that there's a quiet person in the corner that's got all this beautiful stuff that maybe he or she is a little bit shy about, and you would kind of bring them out of their shell and let them flourish without being brash and abrasive in maybe the way that he needed, for example. And I thought that was a really, really cool thing, and it was really nice to hear that.
That's a very sweet of Anders to say that. I hope that's what I was able to do. He's a mega talent in that field, without a doubt. In many fields, he's very creative, also a fantastic musician, all around a great artist. So, I think Anders has been one of my true joys of having the privilege to work with him and watch him grow and develop in his different ways. After I left BMW, I wrote I dumped everything that I had in me out into a book called Peter Teufel, which actually ran in Amazon ebooks for about 3 weeks. Much longer than that, for quite a while. I think I sold all of like 9 copies of it or something like that. Even though it had a pizza back guarantee, it cost like $9, and I figured that's the same price as a pizza. So if you come to my place and don't like the book, I'll buy you a pizza, right? Anyway, and in the first draft of that book, I remember very distinctly the opening line it's about a design manager, a car design manager. It's a fiction book, but it was about that. The opening line was from somebody talking about the design manager saying, but does he even like cars? And to me, that was a question that kind of dogged me all through my career, because among the car guy set, I never really matched all the, all the points on the compass. I wasn't restoring a Ferrari in my garage, and I didn't have this insane collection of model cars, and I wasn't, I couldn't name every Lamborghini made since the first tractor. That kind of sense of car guyness was never part of my shtick. But I like to think that by maybe not being obsessed with let's say the physicality of the phenomenon, it gave me a lot more game room to play with the people side of it and the cultural side of it. And I appreciate very much car design. It's still my fascination. I still call myself a car designer. Even if I'm doing cartoons, it's a car designer. The Archie is a car design to me in another format. But I appreciate very much the fact that BMW and other companies allowed me into their culture of pure car guyness to be able to express myself and do a job and create added value, hopefully, but do it in a way which didn't require me to overly conform to their template. And that could be one of the things that when Anders refers to some of those things, he's referring to that. Certainly, I trusted everybody to the point where I would say, okay, before you shoot me, make sure you know which way you're aiming, because when you pull the trigger, I'm gone. And that's kind of like what Anders is referring there to, because I trusted my team totally on this stuff.
That's awesome. I know. I don't have. I guess I don't have the right word or the right question to know how somebody in your position dealt with that sort of environment so early on. I mean, it's such a young age, because I wonder, like, you had interviews with Wolfgang Reitzer, is that right?
Yeah, of course. He was my boss for,
and he,
I don't know, how many years was he my boss for? I don't know, 9 years or something. I don't know how many years.
So was he the guy, did he kind of,
7.
You must have felt a sense of support from him to kind of go against the grain, so to speak, because it must be in an organization that big, there must have been a lot of people that were kind of like, who's this guy? We're not sure about this wacky American coming and taking over our beloved BMW.
Well, I tell you what, if that's going to be the standard mythology, I'll just say, okay. I'm not going to contest it on air. I'll just say,
all right.
Okay.
Listen, Chris, I want to just go through a couple of cars, and before we end off with a couple of questions. First of all,
okay, if you need to run over time, it's okay. But I understand, because I hogged a lot of time.
No. I'm just conscious of your time.
That.
You like so I just.
No, I'm okay. I'm okay.
All right.
Okay.
Listen,
I give. You got another quarter of an hour if you need it. So
brilliant. Okay, so if we go right back to Opel, which I had no idea about your Opel past, but I was going through the interior of the Junior, which I believe that you did, and
sure.
That concept of modular these interchangeable modules on the IP is something that I've seen it explored in studios that I've worked in, but I never ever would have dreamt of it at, whenever that car was done in 81 or early 80s or whatever it was. And I wondered what the inspiration was behind that. Because if you look at that now, you could literally imagine interchangeable iPods, docking stations, and, where these products have a secondary use, which was very much how it was sold at that time. But in so many respects ahead of its time. Where was the inspiration for that?
Well, quite obviously IKEA, the Swedish furniture company. When I came to Opel, Gordy Brown thumped an IKEA catalog on my desk. I'd never been there. I'd never even heard of this store. And he said, you might need some furniture. So here's this. I mean, Gordy didn't realize he had me put in the Opel Wohnheim, which is these little one room kind of like dormitory rooms for guest workers. So I'm on the floor with all these guys from Turkey who they're, working the line. So I stayed there for like 2.5 years in a room that was about the size of what you're seeing around me right now. And furniture, I mean, there's no way you're going to buy furniture for a place like that. But Gordy didn't know that. And he very kindly gave me this catalog. And so I went to IKEA, and I mean, we looked into this stuff. And this whole idea of you take it home and you assemble it yourself, this seemed like the future. Like, this is going to be the future. So I thought, well, that'd be cool. You have a car, you buy it really crude. It's a strip to nothing. You take it home, and your wife gives you for your birthday this instrument, and your son gives you for Christmas something else, and suddenly you can just keep building it. Really cool, right? Except nobody knew how to do it. So I figured out how to make it. There's I don't know, a dozen or so patents on that car, which almost all of them mine, that got me out of hock because back in those days, Opel paid money for patents, and I was really up to debt, and I couldn't get married unless I got this money. So anyway, that really helped. That's another story. But after we did the car, somebody said to me, look, there's a Pininfarina car that has the same modules. I went, really? I honestly, when I did the car, I didn't know that. And I looked back up, and some years before, Pininfarina had done a show car that had these little boxes on it. But they had just stuck them on the instrument panel. They hadn't done anything with them. They just were sitting there, and they looked modular. But the Junior, you could actually take it apart with a key and open it up and unlock it and pull them out and put them in and everything like that. So unwittingly, I was repeating a theme that had already been in discussion at Pininfarina some years earlier. But it was a really fairly unknown show car, a tiny little open speedster. You might look it up. And so when I did when we did the Junior rather, we thought we were just doing something from scratch. So I had to invent a way for the modules to come apart. It never occurred to me to present a concept car that was supposed to be modular and you couldn't actually take the modules out. I mean, that would have been fake. So we actually did it that way. Of course, we faked other things. 2 years earlier or so, we did a car called the Tech One, and we wanted to have digital instruments in it because that was a brand new thing. Like, wow, digital instruments in the future. Of course, nobody knew how to make digital instruments, so I made it out of press type and aluminum foil and cut it all out with little stuff like that.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was total crap, but it looked okay, And in those days, you could get away with
Chris,
but the Junior,
I have a question on the Tech One. The IP of that looks quite similar to what was on the E46. Is that any coincidence there?
Well, as I recall, BMW 3 Series, there was, I can't remember the relationship between the 3 Series and the end of the 2000 series, the instrument panel, but it was the first BMW that came out with the wraparound dash, right?
Yes.
The first really strong one. I think that's the early BMW 3 Series, or is it the 5 Series? And that they were heavily influencing the market. And the guys at GM were always pointing to BMW in terms of this is the guys to copy.
Okay. So GM was looking at BMW and okay.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it was much more so on the Vectra. If you look at the Vectra interior, you'll see I'm doing a straightforward homage to BMW on that. Absolutely right out of the box homage. So I can remember at Opel, I had on my desk one of the air vents from that BMW, which are ungodly beautiful pieces of plastic. I mean, they're so expensive. You can't imagine how anybody could afford to make these air vents, right? They're really cool. So anyway, yeah, it's a little bit turned around.
Next car, Gina. I love that. I need to say, I absolutely love that concept. I asked Anders about it as well. Incredible. Absolutely love it.
There she is on the wall.
Such a cool, I can, yes.
Yeah, and the calendar.
So
yeah, Gina's cool.
The question that I have is, why has that concept not being explored any further, not just by BMW, but car design in general? This concept of a fabric exterior that is morphed by a solid skeleton.
Well, there's kind of a number of things going on in that car. Some of them were followed up to a deeper level than others. One of them is the idea of fabric as the exterior of a vehicle. Right? You know, as we said at the time, every other truck on the road has got a textile exterior on the back of it, right? And when you're following behind one of those trucks, you can see some of the disadvantages at speed. They tend to do that. And Gina as well. I mean, Gina, the car has actually been over 100 kilometers an hour in the tunnel. And I don't know how fast on the road because it's a real Z8 underneath the hood. But it does flutter at speed. And our argument was, that's fantastic, because we want you to think you're going faster than you are.
So you slow down.
As speed limits come down. So what could be better than that, right? That also, the stretch fabric has some inherent disadvantages, that the latex is reacts to the sunlight, and you would have to probably reskin it about every 2 years. Again, we said, what a great thing. You know, we're trying to get people to come back into dealerships. What could be cooler? You come back in and have your car reskinned in a new color, you know? Beats the hell out of washing it. You know, stuff like this. You know, other issues like it's puncturable. We say, come on, you have cloth cabrios out there. Nobody's going around sticking knives in those all the time. So there were gives and takes on all these things. But at the end of the day, the whole thing hinged on a different relationship between the customer, the product, and the company. You would have to have a much more intimate relationship where the customer understood that replacing the skin every 2 years was a normal thing to do, where the company understood that reaching out to customers and offering them that was a normal thing to do, etc. And so it was more likely, we felt, that it would find a home in motorcycles first, where people are used to changing skins and colors. You know, they have suits that match the bikes and stuff like this. It didn't get any traction among the motorcycle guys, even though we did a number of studies on that. But after that, in terms of an actual product carrying it, hard to see any examples of it, probably for the reasons I said. On the other hand, one of the secondary things about it is it's kind of a process of understanding textiles and flexible materials in an environment. And it very much influenced BMW's interiors, which were trying to find ways to use flexible surfaces as pockets, as different ways of approaching things, and inspired a whole look and feel of the company, which called surface design. It's just surfaces. There's no solid mass. You know, this is a surface, but this is a solid mass. So if you have an interior made of surfaces like this is just surfaces, you have a different kind of a feel about it. And that leads to the third point, which is the surface vocabulary, shapes and forms. Gina introduced the idea of interior splines to a shape. Now, splines are well known from mathematical descriptions of surfaces, but in a physical world, a spline would be a theoretical that appears without hitting the endpoints of the surface, meaning I don't happen to have anything cloth around me here right now, but if I did, and you could imagine, I have a sweater. That's always good, you know. You imagine something. Can you see this? I don't know. You imagine, this is kind of a weird video we're doing here. You imagine something poking up out of it, which is establishing a theoretical line, which doesn't run to the edge like a seam would. You know, like this. If I do this, now I'm running from here to here. This was something that just kind of appears in the surface and disappears again. That visual language was not really known before. Anders did a ace job on the Z4, the original Z4.
Love it.
And that was kind of the whole start of how we can understand surfaces as different than just being the outside of a volume. After that, you know, we did the 5 Series and other vehicles that were based on this idea of just surface in and of itself. And so I would say Gina lived on and still lives on in many ways in that shape. Where it really had impact here, and here I must really say I was completely surprised at how many architects have told me, you know what, I know where I was when I first saw Gina. You know, that's a comment that people say for, like, you know, when Kennedy was shot or something monumental, usually disastrous of that nature. But they said, no, Gina was so mind-breaking that a car could have no seams, you know, that a shape could just open and close like that. That architecture, which was way ahead of car design in terms of textiles in building development, the young architects really began to look at that. And some, in their development years, put a lot into studying Gina for architecture. I even co-taught a course at Harvard at Graduate School of Design in Jena for architecture
Incredible.
with Frank Barco from Barco Library.
Wow. Absolutely incredible, Chris.
So a little bit lives on.
Chris, you slightly related, but somehow off topic as well. Any like role models or mentors that kind of influenced you in whether it be? I know you. For example, you were influenced by Frank Gehry, but I guess this was probably from a creative standpoint. But was there anybody that really had a profound impact on you in terms of your leadership?
Leadership, definitely. Lincoln, there's a book I would advise your readers to get. It's Lincoln by Gore Vidal. It's a fiction book, but it's basically a factual account of his years as a president. And when you're done reading that book, which is about that
Writing
thick,
it down.
you should read a book called Lincoln on Management, which is a very thin book. But if you don't actually read his historical accounts, you won't appreciate the stories in the Lincoln on Management, which is nothing more than he just gleans out of the historical account all the cool things that Lincoln actually did to keep himself sane during like pretty horrific times, and also run pretty effective administration in many ways. So those books were highly, highly influential on me, I must say. I used to read all kinds of books on management theory and war, war books on how to, it's, after a certain point you're going, wait, is this right, what we're reading here? And then you read other books on it and you get into other veins of thought. Actually influencing management styles. Here, I think humanities studies did more for me for that, to understand how psychology concepts work, just to know what it means to be applying them into groups. I think I might be the only design studio that has a doctor of psychology on staff. We hired a guy, he's a doctor of psychology. He's also a fantastic animator in the meantime. But when we have clients and they have problems adjusting designers to business needs, it's helpful to have somebody who understands how the human brain works in those matters. So that's very useful here. I look back at my desk back here at all the things that are influencing me, and I think I just acquire it as I go along. Every time I find something that I find useful, I weave it in. Like this book here. Sorry, I strangled myself on this damn thing. This book? Understanding
I know it because of the talk that you gave.
A hell of a book, a hell of a book on how cartoonists are able to communicate emotional values and get your mind to do half the job for you, which is a wonderful, incredibly a wonderful lesson for all designers. I think design management is a little bit different than many other management skills because it requires you to be a designer first. It's difficult to be a design manager, I think, if you're not fluid in the idea of design, the thought process of design, where this takes you and wants to take you. And once you kind of get into that, you realize that, companies are like people, design products are like people, and if you really understood people better, you'd be able to do all those things better. And so everything, little by little by little, leads you back into the humanities, back into where people come first, and you try to understand what's happening from a people point of view. And then you go, well, you know what, that's no different than from a thing point of view, except it might be, whatever. But at least you have a standpoint to begin from. And I take a lot of notes on these things. I have notebooks chock-a-block full of my notes on how the world works and how I think it should work and doesn't work. And then when it comes down to writing something like Archie, just the Archie story alone is 120,000 words. And that's the first 1/3 of season 1. Oh, by the way, do I get to answer the question on what?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, when it comes down to doing things like this, there's this rich font of a rich well you can draw from of ideas that people have been trying to tell you. It's just like going past you because you're too busy worrying about this. But if you sit down and think for a second, damn, there's a lot of smart people out there trying to tell you stuff. It helps if you listen.
Chris,
I'm not saying I'm one of them. I'm just saying I'm trying to listen.
Chris, you also, I've got two more questions for you, and I'm gonna let you go. First question is.
No, you're gonna let me finish with.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes.
No. But give me your two questions first.
First question is: what should young people with the wrong passports do to focus their energy into getting into their creative passions? Because you mentioned
you
I
picked
picked up on
that, huh?
everything. I picked up on absolutely everything, and I've got too many things that I'm trying to prioritize to ask you with the time. But I think that that's a very useful question to ask.
Well, the point I wrote that was that so many young car designers focus so much on drawing automobiles with four wheels that the idea that their talents and their focus, they should do exactly the same thing, could be done dealing with another set of products. Sorry, I just happen to have this stupid pencil sharpener here. I really like it a lot. It's one of my favorites. It's Kohler here. It's a little PR.
Are you sponsored by them?
I should be, for Christ's sake. Actually, I should be sponsored by these guys, Blackwing Pencils. Can you believe this? I went into Art Center only understanding pencils. Came out of Art Center only understanding pens, because Art Center frowns on pencils. They said, no, pencils, no, pens, right? If you can use a pencil, it's a colored pencil, none of this graphite shit, right? 40 years go by, and then I get into cartoons and animation, and I suddenly discover these Blackwing pencils that have been used by animators since the 20s, made in California. That's really special. They got rebuilt as a company, and we started devouring these things by the package here. So it's kind of strange, that you have to go through this. Anyway, forget all that. So the idea is, if these young guys and girls have so much passion about the automobile, they should think about their passions and try and understand how much of it has to do with actually the automobile per se, and how much it has to do with the emotion of drawing cars. Because the emotion of drawing cars is a wonderful set of a mental muscle feedbacks, muscle memory feedbacks that you get into. It gets in some shapes, these wonderful responses that the paper and the colors and the shininess are giving you, because, damn it, now I can draw reflection. And Jesus, now I can draw a wheel in perspective. And wow, I know how to put a shadow under it. And oh, look at this, I just made the glass seem transparent. These are all these moments, personal, wow, what do you say, growth, that as a young designer, they're super important to you. In my day, we did it with pencils and markers. Nowadays, you have to go through computer programs and all kinds of stuff. So the learning curve didn't get any easier. But the satisfaction is still there from that. But to say, that same satisfaction, I could turn into something that doesn't require an automobile industry around me to give me a job. This is something that's missing, because they see it as, this is a product and it is distinctly different from the thing with the four wheels. Hang on a sec.
Beautiful.
My representative of car design today will be in the form of a candle holder in the shape of some sort of exotic old car. Okay? So this idea, these things, is where the whole love affair is at. When in reality, this mentality, character approach, aesthetic approach applied to other things in our lives would make these things so much cooler. This is what I'm trying to get across to them, because unfortunately the passport barrier, you cannot out creative. You just can't get your ass around that. Sorry. It's still there, a barrier, until the car companies figure out a way that they're going to offshore everything, and it doesn't matter where you sit at home and you can participate in it, you're going to have this problem. All right? And even then, it's going to be a problem, because really doing car design is about a cohesive atmosphere of multiple people. A singular thing, one guy alone in his garage carving a shape, you could do it, but it isn't much fun. So my encouragement is for these young people to say, yeah, I like car design, but let's jack it up a few meta levels. What is it that we're really doing here? And can I have just as much fun and get just as much satisfaction about doing something that actually I get paid for without, having to defect. That helpful?
Absolutely helpful. Sorry, you broke.
I lost.
No, you broke up.
There you go.
Yeah. No, absolutely helpful. I think it's wonderful advice, and I think it's also, it needs to be said that while being a car designer is a great profession, it's not always everything that we perceive it to be from the outside. And I think that what you're saying is that it's the creative process that can be applied to many other things that can give you just as much satisfaction, if not more so. So that's
my take on car design being a profession, right?
No, I don't. But give it to me.
As a little anecdote, I might close on here because we're getting near the end of time.
Okay.
But you did have another question. I will just tell you this anecdote very quickly. When I was at BMW, I brought over a journalist from America. It had nothing to do with cars. He was a political journalist, and we had lunch together as he was giving my team a talk about information, documentation, communication from a press point of view. And he said to me at lunch, "So did you go to college?" Like, why? Are you asking me this? Like, am I eating with the wrong fork or something or what? No, just interested. I said, yeah, I actually went to college. Really? What did you get a degree in? I got a degree in car design. Oh, there is such a thing as a degree in car design. I said, yeah. Well, tell me that. What does one learn to get a degree in car design? Well, you learn to draw cars. Ah, he says, you have a degree in drawing cars. I said, oh, come on, He knew all this stuff. He was just baiting me the whole time. I said, oh, come on, drawing cars is just part of the profession. Really? Is car design a profession? I said, well, do they have a body of peer review? Do they have a licensing board? Do they have a journal of best practices? Do they bam, 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 bam? He's nailing me with all this stuff that architects and engineers and medical doctors, all these professions have, right? And so I'm like, well, we got like car styling and, road and track. How's that sound? So at that point, I realized there's a gulf that divides professions from what we do. And so we may get paid for it, but to call it a profession, I've come to grips with not calling it that. Fair enough. Out of respect for those people who actually are in professions. I mean, my studio manager is an architect, okay? She's an architect. She has to spend every week in online courses to upgrade her license, because if you don't take the courses, the state will take away your architectural license. Now, can you imagine doing that as a car designer?
Horrific. Last question, Chris. You said the car designers are not equipped to deal with the upcoming challenges of the future. And I wonder if you have any advice for what car designers should be focusing on, or what they could do to try and mitigate some of that delta in their skill sets.
Well, first of all, that phrase applies to all design, because I also used it in the speech at Whitney, saying design is just not prepared to cope with it. I mean, it is mentally unprepared to cope with the challenge of Original Sin 2.0, and technically completely without the skill sets. All right. You yourself said, where do I start when I have to deal with something that goes across time barriers? Car design, however, is a particular instance in and of itself. And it begins with the idea, as my son likes to say, car design is car guys teaching other car guys how to be car guys. And, as long as that goes on, we're going to be in this regressive sense of narrowing down the funnel of what can be car design down to a kind of let's say, extrapolation of the past, which is very similar to how architecture in the past has gone through some of its own phases, where it stopped progressing because there were no new technologies, there were no new ways of doing things, and there was also no new ways of seeing things. And so architecture in the past has gone through these regressive moments where the only thing they can do is they can begin to parody themselves. And this is exactly what car design is doing now. Because it can only look backwards and not forwards, it has this parody of itself in mind, which is why everything you see tends to be in the same set of tropes. This begins with the language of car design. Car design, they don't think about their language, but if you want to know anything, you have to begin semantically. If I haven't said this in this interview, I realize I haven't. I should have emphasized the role that semantics play in our world. And that means, as a car designer, words are important. And if you want to find new design, you have to find new words. And unfortunately, we're using the same words. We always have been. Dynamic and aggressive and words like this. Organic. There's a few other words like this. We've been too long subject to the tropes that the brands have imposed upon car designers, thinking that that's a good way to maintain their validity, but in reality, it's just death prolonged. It's just a slow death, right? The longer we let the brands dictate what car design is, the slower and more painful the death is. Instead, the car designers have to realize, and when I say car designers realize this, I mean first and foremost the people who pay car designers, right? Those people have to, because they're as much car designers as the guys moving the pencils, because they're making the decisions. The people who are involved in this decision-making process have to understand that true design research only begins when you look outside of the tropes that you've walled people in with. You go off those barrier edges of, I've never seen it before. You go off those barrier edges of, I don't know how to pay for this, or nobody will pay for this. You go off that barrier that says, this isn't our brand. Only if you get past those, and you're only going to get past those with new semantics, can you begin to understand what is possible for car design to achieve. And what it wants to achieve is what? It wants to be meaningful. It wants to have a relationship to people out in the world where it's significant, where people don't dismiss it as a fragment of a past which they're rapidly moving away from. Instead, they see it as something which can have relevance in their own lives. And this is what I'm missing. I'm missing somebody coming up to me and saying, young person saying, you know what, that car is relevant to me. What are they saying? That 73 Gremlin is relevant to me. You know, this 1981 Fiat is relevant to me. Because there's nothing new that is coming about which matches the times that we live in, which are times which are completely different than the ones in which those founding principles for car design were built upon. So, as you can see, I can get a little bit critical about this. This is what really bothers me about car design, is that for too long, they've taken ideas like research and completely doped them into the corporate communication process so that all we get is some rehash of where they're going to go anyway. We don't see anything that is challenging. Gina, I believe, was one of the true last pieces of research. Actually, one of the last ones is Reds, the car we did, because that car truly was research. How do you do a car which is different when you look at it than when you get inside of it? You don't begin with the outside, you begin with the inside. Everybody says they do that, but we actually did that. Okay, what happens next? You have a car which has to look like something it isn't. How do you do that? You don't divide it up horizontally like cars nowadays, a lower part and an upper part, and you don't even divide it up as it goes along like cars used to do. You know, the front part looks different than the back. You have to divide it up along the sides away from the middle part, which basically hasn't been done in car design since God only knows how many eons. But Reds does that. And this is a product of what design research is all about, just like Gina was. And this is what I'm missing today. This is what I want to see. It's not just about a new material and can we use a computer to do a surface that we could have done otherwise in another manner. That's not it. It's truly where's the meaning behind that is opening up in my head as an observer a whole new significance to that car for me. And so that's what I'd like to see.
That was amazing. I don't have any words. I don't have any
That
words.
was my rant. That's Chris's rant at
Chris,
the end of the
I have
thing.
I have no questions for you, but you can finish off on your Inanimati.
All right, why don't you do me a great favor and you can take this piece and plug it in earlier so that you can close with a good rant, you know, and that way people think Chris goes out fighting, you know, instead of plugging his goddamn cartoons, you know. Well, I was just going to say, I'm going to take that rant. I'm going to post that online as an advert for this episode, and that people are going to love it. So that's what I'm going to do. Can you run it by me one time just so I know what I'm saying there? I would definitely appreciate that because just to make sure
Chris,
the coherence is.
I will.
You know, I have a tendency to be a little bit incoherent.
Absolutely.
Sometimes. Let me tell you what we're doing here with this. This is a sustainability project for the studio. By that, I mean it's our intention here that this studio has a basis in an IP and intellectual property developed here with the people here. On a secondary level, it's got lots to offer in terms of analogies for design, metaphors for doing design processes, and seeing the world differently from a designer point of view if you get into this objective thought process. And so there's lots of things to mind there. You get even deeper on it, and this is what really interests me now. We have a friend who is like totally into Web 3.0 and AI and blockchain and all this kind of stuff, right? And he said something to me recently that just really shook me. He said, Chris, there isn't anybody who's dealing with AI who hasn't gone through the existential question, is what I'm working on going to destroy humanity? He said everybody in AI has looked into the mirror and asked that question. And when he read, let's say, into Archi, he read into the Fabula Rerum, the Inanimati, and he read the philosophical conceptual basis behind it. He said, you know what? They are the roots here of a different philosophy, which is, if you want to put it, thing-based and not human-based, which could be a true salient point for giving AI a human face. He said, if you look at the idea of purpose as it's expressed in the Inanimati, it is truly about why we do what we do. And it's a big deal. You know, the Inanimati exist for their purposes. They're how do I want to say, tabulated and kept track of, and they come in a particular manner from all the possibilities of the universe. The purposes are set apart so that they can be accountable for their purposes. And he said, you know, from an AI point of view, that's really the way we want them to understand us humans, as having purpose. Like, we don't have to have our existence justified through some sort of other philosophical background or historical roots. You know, there's that famous saying, if you ask AI to clean up the climate problem, the first thing they do is wipe out the people,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
Kind of famous ism, right? If you really want to give AI a reason for coexisting with us, you have to give it one that is based on its thought processes. And that is probably much closer to where Archi is. Now, I'm probably saying this way out of turn, and it's something that maybe I shouldn't say myself, because as the co-creator of this, and I say co-creator because all my colleagues have contributed to this. You know, you've seen what my son has added to it. When we do the unboxings, you see what Theo adds to them, and everybody else. You know, they're all co-contributors to this. It's probably not our place to derive these lessons from it, but it's something I feel now so strongly about. I want to find the way to make Archi available to people. So our goal is now to, on the one hand, try and make Archi a cartoon that young people will enjoy and grow up with. And that means we have to go through the gatekeepers of that world. It means we have writers like Ken, and we have producers, and we have animators and houses that we have to deal with to try and get this sold as a cartoon concept. I mean, this is 1/3 of the first season story, and this book is only for the writers, you know. So, I mean, it shows what has to go into a show like this. But on the other hand, what I would like to do is have this entire thing as a kernel, a germ, a beginning online in a meta world where everybody can take it and run with it and develop it and keep going with it and make it more things and spin it back into it, so that the future of Archi and the Inanimati is not one that only comes out from one source, but is actually as close as possible to being a groupthink that everybody who identifies with it, and okay, there's game rules, otherwise the stuff doesn't match. But it's like that in any universe. You know, if you want to play in the Star Wars universe, there are some game rules of the Star Wars universe, and it's the same for Harry Potter universe, etc. But this one maybe has relevancy beyond just good storytelling. And that's where I'd like to see it go.
Chris, as soon as you have launched any NFTs on this, please let me know. I'm interested.
Yeah, that's our big deal right now. That's where we're going to go with it. But, you know, the NFT business is just to get our foot in the door. And
yeah, absolutely. But that will allow you to...
Where I want to be is, I want to be there where you say, I don't know anything about it, and it doesn't matter. Because what I feel about my world, there's parts of it that are relevant. Just help me find those parts.
Yeah, but it would be a great way to help you potentially sidestep some of those gatekeepers as well. You know, because you could raise your own money without the need for a publisher, for example, or So
Yeah.
whatever. It's a conversation for another time.
I'm
But
learning.
I'm
We're
very
learning.
interested. Let me know, and I'm sure many other people will be as well. I believe in what you are doing, and I think it's great. And
You are very kind.
and
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Chris, I mentioned in my email as well. You're a hero of mine. You were the first famous first car designer that I knew of when I discovered this world. I loved all the petitions that I saw online of like, let's fire this guy, and I know what a tough feat that must have been. So and I just thank you.
Yeah, like I used to paraphrase, Andy Warhol. In the future, everybody will have our own hate website. Unfortunately, it turned out to be true. I had no idea that social media would come in and fill that
Jesus.
gap.
Wow.
Holy
wow.
shit.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it would have been even more brutal today, but I remember when I Googled your name, I was like, Chris Bangle. And it was like, all these like really nasty stuff, like death threats and this guy needs to leave our beloved BMW alone and all that stuff. And that I could really identify with that. And not with the hate mail, but with you being this outsider, this maverick taking on the world. So I thank you so much for doing this, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This is great fun.